everybody.
Hello.
Hello. My name is Zoe Weizenbaum, and this is my mom, Sharon Weizenbaum.
Mom Sharon Weizenbaum.
Yes, Mother Weizenbaum. I am here because she. So today we're going to talk about our farm. The name of our farm is Ancient Ponies Farm, and this is our 7th year at this farm. We're going into our 7th growing season, and I just wanted to show you some photos so you have a visual of what the land is like and what our operation is like. It's a pretty unique space. So this is the pasture. My mom bought the land 7 years ago, and it was a 20-foot wall of multiflora rose and poison ivy, and it was a super neglected pasture. And do you want to say a bit about your path to buying this?
Well, I just saw it on the market and said I can't possibly have this because I can't afford it. But then some circumstances worked out, including going profoundly into debt after I had worked my life to get out of debt. Went right back in and bought the farm. Yeah, and it's just so beautiful, and there was something that just drew me right to it. And I actually bought it by myself. Zoe was living in Taiwan at the time, and but Zoe came home and just kind of fell in love. She's just looking around like going, wow, I could do something with this. And
Where's
so
your farm located, if I can ask?
it's in Shutesbury, Massachusetts, right near North Amherst.
Okay.
Yeah, and and I already had horses, so I had 2 horses, so I moved them to the farm, and we did so much work in the first couple of years to get it into a workable farm and figuring out our relationship with each other. So tell about the operation. Those are our 4 horses now.
Yeah, so we really just dove right in. I set to work taking care of the horses, mucking out the stalls, feeding them, and in the fall of that first year, we raised a huge garden with the help of a lot of community members. We had a big work party, and the soil here was really sandy and acidic, and so we added a ton of compost and cardboard to build a no-till garden that is a mandala that my mom designed, and it's about 100 feet in diameter is the garden that we're working with. It's really beautiful. And to teach myself how to farm, I originally took a class with this man his name is Danny Botkin. He has taught here before, incredibly inspiring, and he was a mentor for me. I went to his farm every week and worked alongside him, and he taught me how to grow food, and he also gave me my first goats. So that was how I started my herd. I also audited classes at UMass in permaculture. And here is the first goat that we got from Danny, one mom and her 2 kids, and the kids immediately started attracting the kids, which kind of began this momentum, of community being drawn in to the farm, especially around baby goat season. Everybody is there holding the goats, socializing the goats, doing the hard work of socializing the baby goats.
Yeah, and that goat, that was her first breeding. And so she was just a year old when she had those twins. And she's been bred now every year since then. So she's had five seasons of giving birth and just an incredible milker. She's had triplets the last 2 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 5 goats pregnant now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Including her.
Yeah. And this is the garden that first year. And just, I was so blown away by just the miracle of putting seed to soil and what happens. But also, this garden is completely new. You know, this is its first summer and it's just already so productive. So we were really excited about the no-till method and how fertile the soil can get so quickly. Yeah, big daikons. And so what we started out doing is I was teaching myself to grow food, and we had a lot of extra, so I would sell in front of the market near our house, Cushman Market, at a little farm stand. And I continued to learn. I took a permaculture design course in Shelburne Falls. And then I realized that I couldn't do it alone. And so I looked on Workaway, which is like woofing, and you can get people to live on the farm and work in exchange for room and board. And so that began several years of working with people from all over the world and developing these really incredible relationships. This is our very first Workawayer. And we also brought in that first year, that was our second year, we did a series of workshops at the farm. So people I had learned to grow food from, I invited to the farm to teach. And that kind of has continued to be an important part of what we do is teaching people about goats and growing food and all kinds of stuff at the farm. We had a clay oven making workshop. These are more Workaway folks, and my godmother made these awesome scare people. And this is just to show, like, all throughout there's been a lot of things that go wrong.
Getting the tractor stuck in the mud and having to figure
Lots
it
of
out.
water.
Yeah, exactly. Eventually we decided to build a greenhouse, and other important happenings. We had a baby horse born at the farm, Zephyr, who's now 3 years old, and we're riding him.
It's called ancient ponies because the breed of horse we have is, they're called Dale's ponies, which is an endangered breed from England. After World War II, there were only 3 mares left of this breed. So I just love this breed, and so, you know, it's to promote the breed so that it can proliferate more and do well. If you have any questions after about Dale's ponies, I can answer them.
Yeah. And during COVID, we were going to do another series of workshops, but we couldn't. And so what we decided to do is start a CSA, because that could happen, outdoor pickups. And that first season, we had folks coming to this farm cart. We had like 20 families that first season. And we also had a pick your own gardens. This is that greenhouse in the first year, really full. And another big aspect of our operation is cheese. We brought some goat cheese, and this is to demonstrate kind of over the years we've just had the opportunity, the pleasure to refine different things and just get better and better at making feta and chancliche and aged cheese and there's the longer we stay on the land, that there's all these aspects of it that just deepen, and cheese is one of them. This is another system that we refined, which is we have a hotbed in the greenhouse, and it's basically just a large box full of manure, and it produces all of this heat, and we start all of our seeds on top of that heat. And it's incredible. In the spring, when it's maybe 20 degrees at 5 in the morning and I have all my eggplants and peppers there, if I throw a row cover over there, the emanating heat from the hotbed can increase the temperature by like 20 degrees. So it makes a huge difference for us. Just got better at growing food. You saw that first picture of the garden was like this wild jungle of green, and we started to get more kind of efficient. And we increased the number of families that we grow food for to 30. And I started teaching workshops on the farm. I really am excited about fermentation in particular. And ultimately, we got to the point where we could start to be sharing plants as well. I got this rhubarb from Danny, who taught me how to farm, and now I've been able to share it with others, which felt really nice. Another aspect of our farm that feels very important is our relationship to the forests that surround. Yes, my mom is especially a voracious forager and collects a lot of mushrooms on horseback and ramps. And this year I was really excited because we also started a tea operation. So that's another thing that we give in our CSA is tea. I just wanted to show that, like, all throughout all of this learning and developing it, there's always things going wrong. Like Luna managing to get her head inside of a tiny square. And this is the farm crew right now. It's me and Cal. We used to have a rotating crew of a lot of workaway folks, but I'm running this as my business, and it's not, Workaway isn't really set up to have volunteers for a for-profit business, and so now I have a hired farmhand helper, and that's been really great to develop that relationship. They're coming on for their second season in 2024. And here we are. This is mushrooms. These are our giant shiitakes. So this
Do you grow them? Excuse me. Do you forage those, or do you grow those?
We did some logs. We inoculated some logs for the shiitakes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we forage a lot for the CSA too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is us. We have been collaborating on this farm for 7 years, and I think it feels pretty unique to have this mother-daughter collaboration, and I think a lot of what has made it work has been just the being on the same page about the philosophy of how we make decisions. And so we're going to talk today about the underlying philosophies that guide the farm, and especially how they relate to Chinese medicine. So
I've been practicing Chinese medicine since my hair was brown. So actually more than 40 years I've been practicing Chinese medicine, and I'm just still more and more in love with Chinese medicine, and especially the principles that are underlying Chinese medicine. In 1990, I went and lived in China for half a year, and that's where I met Zoe's dad, and came home pregnant with her. Best thing that ever happened to me. Let's see. So what I really want to talk about is yin yang. Because yin yang is, you've all heard of yin yang, and that theory of yin yang is the kind of foundational theory of Chinese philosophy and Chinese medicine. Most people understand yin yang as sort of these opposites. There's the male and the female. There's hot and cold, hot being more yang and cold being more yin. But really, for me, the main principle that is important to me about yin yang, that I think also influences the kind of foundational principles that the farm is being run under, is the idea of yin and yang in right relationship with each other. Like, not a lot is talked about the relationship between yin and yang. It's more like how are they opposed to each other. So I want to talk a little about the relationship of yin yang. So first of all, yang is sort of more the fire, male, hot principle, and yin is more cold, female, form versus spirit. Things you can divide, the cloudy side of a mountain versus the sunny side of a mountain. The top of the mountain is yang compared to the bottom of the mountain is yin. So comparing things that way. But in terms of the relationship of yin-yang, there's what I call yin-yang in right relationship. And the right relationship for yin-yang in the human body, which is what I work with in my practice, is for yang to be underneath yin. When yang is underneath yin, then yin is the cold, watery principle, and water goes down, right? It tends to flow down, and yang is the fiery principle. It tends to go up. So if yang is underneath yin, then it is going to interact with yin. One's going to go up and one's going to go down, and they're going to start to interact in a way that creates life. So even my own yang has to be really well rooted in my body so it can interact with my form. And when you see a fairly healthy being, whether it's a tree or an animal, what you're seeing is an integration of yin and yang. Like, you don't see yang, you don't see yin, you see form that's got warmth and can stand upright. You can see the yang that's inside the yin. So, and pathology is always when yin yang are out of relationship with each other. So if you have like a migraine headache or hot flashes, then you see yang, like there's this stuff, this fire going up in your body, right? That's not rooted inside the yin. Or if you have diarrhea or a miscarriage or edema, there you're seeing the yin that's lost its relationship with yang. So I hope this is making sense to people. But, yang has to be underneath the yin. It's kind of like if you tried to make a soup and you put fire on top of the soup pot, nothing would transform. But if you put the fire under the water and the vegetables, then you can make soup. And it's the same in our bodies. Like, yang has to be inside and under the form in order to transform and support our bodies. So diagnosing people, we're looking for how are yin-yang losing their right relationship with each other. So another aspect of yin-yang is that yang, the sun is called the taiyang. It's the great yang, is the name for the sun in Chinese. And the great yang is, we know the sun shines radiantly in every direction, but when we're standing on earth, it's shining down on us. From that vantage point, it shines down on us. So it's understood that we're receiving yang from heaven all the time. and it's kind of an invisible pathway of this warmth that comes into our body, but it's also going into plants, and then we eat the plants, and so we get this yang. And if you think about it, the yang is our life force is yang, and we know that because when you're dead, you're cold, right? When you're dead, you don't have any warmth left. That's what leaves is the warmth. So this life force is warm, and we're always receiving it through the sun and through what we eat, and it comes down in our bodies like yang coming down from heaven, and then it actually pivots and changes direction so that it can then start working in my body, transforming my body and supporting my body. So you see that yin-yang symbol, that circular movement, so then when I'm supported, I can then go out and act in the world, and it's a constant process that we're receiving influences from heaven, expressing them back out again. And so this is a really important principle in Chinese medicine. Like, how do we receive these influences? Are we taking them in well? And are we able to, or do they move well in our body? Are we able to express them back out? But another important part is, how do I store my influences? So am I storing it properly, or is it leaking out, like in the form of edema or hot flashes, that kind of thing? So in my practice, that's what I'm working with, making sure it's coming in okay, it's circulating okay, and it's stored okay. So that principle of yin-yang, you can see, is like foundational for medicine. Like, how do we, the main thing with Chinese medicine is like, how am I doing with this? Am I aligned to these movements of heaven and earth coming through my body? And health is when you're aligned and yin-yang are in right relationship with each other. And all illness is some way that they're coming out of right relationship. So with that introduction about yin-yang, I'm going to hand it over to Zoe to see how do you see these principles playing out in the farm. Like, there are actually many ways these principles play out in permaculture. So maybe you could tell us about that.
Yeah. And I also am curious, other farmers in the room hearing that, if there's examples from your experience working with land or animals that feels like, oh yeah, like that's a parallel. That's like yin and yang and right relationship in my context too. So feel free to jump in. But for me, the first thing that comes to mind is soil, and the way that healthy soil can store resources better. So we do no-till, and our treatment of the soil is super simple. We just do an inch of compost over all of our garden beds once a year. And just feeding the surface of the soil and not turning the soil. We don't even broad fork the soil. It allows for the life in the soil to move up from below and feed on the organic material, the compost on the surface, and create these channels for water to move through the soil, and not just move through it, but for water to be absorbed by the soil and to stay in the soil. So yeah, I think I also think about, the concept of sun, taiyang, the yang, and how we're able to, like, I'm picturing a field that's been tilled, and there's like this baking sun, and it's just getting like more and more depleted. It's not really able to like take in that resource and convert it into life, as well as, our soil, even in drought seasons, is able to retain moisture and not be kind of baked by the sun. It's able to take full advantage of that sun, because it's well supported with water as well.
Right, it sort of can come down, and then because it's covered and dark and moist, it can interact. The young can come in and interact with that moisture, where tilling sort of tears the soil asunder. And in a way, like in the human body, how do we tear it asunder? Maybe by overworking, like taking our resources and just exposing them too much to the outside world, and not, or having insomnia, like not being able to sleep and hold things under that need time to be underneath in order to renew. So that covering on the soil is that the storage ability. It happens in nature everywhere, that the soil is covered, and that's the storage of the resources that's so important, so life can grow out of it. And I want to say something else about when yin yang are out of right relationship. Yang is like for itself, and so there's a lot of yin yang out of right relationship in our culture, where agribusiness is sort of for making money. Like we want to use the soil and take everything from it in order to make money for me, And so I think part of the permaculture principle is, how do we have the small farms and farms that are about that being for the soil itself, for the farm itself, for the community, for the world, like where we're thinking about what is the yang in service of? Is it in service of itself, or is it in service of the yin, to help the yin aspect grow? Yeah.
Just a little bit more on that metaphor. You're talking about the tilled soil, the yang of the sun baking the soil, making it hard, which is more and more yang, right? Because this hardness is yang. But when the water hits it, it becomes soft. The water is yin.
Or just the opposite, it runs off.
It's not able.
Well, if it's too hard.
Right.
In other words, when it's
been
dry, the
overbaked.
water gets wasted and it doesn't get absorbed because it's so desiccated.
Sure.
That's exactly right.
I'm curious, do you cover your 1 inch of compost with anything? Like leaves or seaweed or anything like that?
Yeah, our process right now is we'll do 1 inch of compost, and then when we get the first flush of weeds, we'll hoe before they've even put on their second set of leaves.
Right.
And then towards the middle of the growing season, we'll cover the compost. So we'll wait to cover the compost until we are able to hoe.
Okay.
Has been our...
With mulch.
Yeah.
Right, so just the
Yeah.
farm that I worked on for years and stuff, we always covered for fall and winter, so it wouldn't get windblown desiccation, and also this baking, the UV light killing the organisms from on the top, 1/4 inch of the soil and stuff. And then we would plant right through it, so there was obviously no tilling, but also no digging other than spread the leaves or the seaweed that we left on, and then plant right through it.
Right through it.
So there's no chance of the weeds coming up.
Yeah.
There's, obviously it's just techniques that we all learn, and sizes of farms and whatever,
But the principles are the
Right,
same,
right.
Like, yeah,
keep the womb warm.
exactly. Keep it in there a long time,
Right.
before it comes out. Yeah.
Depends on your compost too. If the compost has been cooked properly, then you shouldn't have weed seed issues. But if it hasn't, it's a cold process. You're gonna have weed seeds.
Yeah, that's been our issue as well, as getting our compost hot enough. We have horse manure, and the weed seeds just completely survive that digestion process.
Yeah.
And then we also use wood shavings for our bedding. So horse manure is already kind of like a little bit carbon heavy.
Yeah.
And then plus the wood shavings doesn't get super hot. It takes a long time to break down.
Yeah.
It doesn't get super hot. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Looked
works
like
well
straw.
eventually.
It looked like straw in that ramps picture for mulch.
That was in the woods.
That's wild.
That was wild.
I was
Yeah.
because I was going to do a little side.
That's my
Have you been
secret
successful in
place.
transplanting in some places.
No.
Oh, yeah.
That's a found spot, yeah.
Mhm.
Do you use straw for mulch? Did I see straw for mulch
Yeah, it
in one
seemed
of the
like there was
pictures?
some-
Yeah, sometimes we do. Yeah, we have
Or like
a
a weave area too?
yeah, hay or straw.
Well, hay, you gotta watch out for because it will reseed. I
Right.
did that the hard way in my garlic one year,
Yes.
coming right up after it. So.
Yeah, yeah. But we use whatever we have access to, usually. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of absorption and drainage in the human body, it's something I look at a lot with my patients. You know, there's something called dispersion thirst in the ancient books. They call it dispersion thirst, and you know what it means is your mouth is dry, you're thirsty, but when you drink, it goes right through you, and that's a sign that your earth element is dry like a desert. You know, it just goes right through like an arroyo. You know, drink water, whew, gone, and so it's really a health problem because you're not absorbing the water, and that water gets absorbed into your blood, and if you don't absorb that water, your blood gets kind of thickened, which leads to all kinds of problems. And so, you know, we want that earth phase to be absorptive. You know, so there's herbal medicine and acupuncture techniques that can help make the earth element more absorptive in the human body. And more absorptive means it drains better. You know, so you can also have dispersion thirst where you drink and it goes down and it pools up. And we have that in gardens too, where it's rain and it just turns into mud. It doesn't absorb really, or you know, clay-like soil. It turns into mud and it doesn't drain. It just sits there. And so, you know, Zoe can talk about like what is good soil, but it's the exact same thing in the human body, that we're really looking at that earth phase to see, are you absorbing it, are you draining it well? And that's kind of the soil in the human body, the same principle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my approach to soil is, I don't really understand the science of it. I rely on the natural process of just adding organic material to the top layer every year, and every year it just gets better. I also, like, people talk about, like, don't walk on your garden beds because you're gonna compact the soil. And once I put an inch of compost on all the garden beds, I intentionally like stomp down the whole bed, because well, it creates a nice flat planting surface, but also the bed is like this like buoyant. It can totally take it. It can totally take the pressure of walking, and I think it absorbs water better when it's been patted down. There's a man named Charles Dowding who I follow, and he has a lot of really good information on no-till soil health practices. So I recommend him for sure if you want to learn more. But he stomps on all his beds, and so I do too.
Yeah, you learn from doing, you know, you try, see,
Well,
does it work? Is that true? It's kind of a wives' tale, but is it actually true in our garden? And you think about really healthy soil, and it's spongy like that. And we've really found on the farm that our gardens, we've had really, really drought years, like the year before last was a real drought year. Our gardens, you know, do fine, and even very little watering, even in a drought year. And then last summer was really, really wet. There was flooding all around, but it drains well. So that same principle, when you have that good spongy soil and the water comes down, it absorbs it and it drains it. You know, so it's the same in the human body. You know, that it's a little paradoxical, you know, in a certain way, but I think you can understand it when you think about that porous soil that holds water, but it also percolates through. It's permeable kinds of soil. Yeah.
It absorbs just as much as it needs, and then is able to drain any
Mhm.
excess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it stores and it drains both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which also kind of brings us to this concept of resilience too in farming. You know.
Yeah. So I would say that we've set up the farm so that it is resilient in all of these ways, and I think one of the ways in particular is how diverse our operation is. Our veggie operation is, we grow tons of different types of vegetables, and so if one thing doesn't do well, then we can always fall back on the other, and our CSA is set up so that people pay at the beginning, and whatever does well is what they get. And sometimes it's harvests from the forest. Sometimes it's gleaned apples that we turn into cider and give that in CSA. So it feels like in any given season, there's always going to be enough for the CSA because of all the different types of things that we offer.
Yeah, last summer our tomatoes didn't do well last summer. I don't know if other people had that,
There's a lot
but
of rain.
yeah, but the mushrooms were great. So every week, they'd get a big box of maitake or black trumpets or something. So our CSA, they know, we'll give them enough of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And diversity also in the ways that I make money. So we also run an Airbnb, and that's a huge, very solid support to our farm operation. We do workshops. I run a little farm camp with kids. So yeah, it's we do goats for milk and for meat. So there's just a lot of different aspects to the farm that all support us financially, but also are kind of in right relationship with one another. I just think it's so awesome to have animals on, if you're going to be growing food, to also have animals, because our animals provide all of the fertility for our vegetables, and they also eat any excess food waste from the garden, not waste, but any extra food from the garden,
the leftovers.
the trimmings.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe one other example is just the way that we make cheese. I use kefir as my culture for all of the cheese, and there's resilience in that method of cheese making because kefir has this diverse community of fungus and bacteria working together to kind of take up the space within the milk so that other less desirable bacteria and fungus won't occupy that space. And maybe another way of cheese making, which is the majority of cheesemakers use cultures from single strain or maybe 4 strains of a culture from a packet from a factory, and they have to have a hyper hygienic or sanitary or sanitized cheese making room because it's just they have to make a blank slate with their milk by pasteurizing it, and then they add in this one strain. It's the same idea with kind of tilling the fertility out of soil and then having to add in these kind of specific strains of nutrients. It's just once you start kind of understanding this concept, and you're farming, you start to see it everywhere. Like, wow, it just works
Even
so
like
much
the
better.
milk inside the goat's body, and you take out the milk in the morning, and it's fresh out of the body, so it's warm. And we have to make the cheese right away, because if it's exposed to the air, it already starts dying. You know, the ability to make the cheese, all those organisms stored in there are already evaporating out of the milk, and pasteurizing does that too. You know, but we want those in there, so we make the cheese that day with that day's milk. You know, don't store it in the fridge for a couple days and, you know, until you have a ton of milk and make a lot. Just make it that day with that fresh milk before it starts to change. So whatever's stored in there, you're keeping it in there, you know, and covering it, you know, and helping it transform back into another form of life. So that same principle. I also want to mention about the resilience, that the soil being so spongy and full of life, it also makes us really climate resilient. You know, just saying it was dry summer, wet summer, we do okay in either one. And I think that's super important in terms of the principle of permaculture. You know, that these massive tilled farms are really a big problem. And you might know that there's a problem with aquifers all over the country, you know, getting emptied. And where in Shutesbury, where I live, the whole town relies on wells, and we rely on the aquifers. And so the forests up the hill, and all of what the detritus that they put on the ground that turns into this soft soil in the forest, that all slows water down so it has time to sink into the aquifers. And so that's really similar to the resilience of the human body. Like if you are absorbing water and it can take time, it gets absorbed into this oil of our blood, you know. Instead, if it doesn't, it's like the erosion when you clear cut a hill, which they're threatening to do in our town, is clear cutting the forest on this hill, which we're really worried about because of these principles, you know. So the idea of yin-yang is also about resilience, you know, and part of why the massive tilling is so bad. You know, it just takes, the soil is depleted. In fact, death is called, you know, yin-yang separation. That's death. You know, so you have the sun up there and the soil, you know, in wrong relationship with each other because they can't meet in a healthy way. And it's causing a lot of problems on our planet. You know, this yin-yang out of right relationship you see everywhere. So, yeah.
Yeah. One other thing that comes to mind when you're speaking is kind of our relationship, and I feel like we've had to kind of negotiate how to be in right relationship with one another in order to collaborate on this farm. I came home from Taiwan, and I hadn't decided to fully commit to farming yet, and it was kind of unclear my responsibility towards the upkeep of the house and the land, and you know, I'm your daughter, and so you want to support me, but I wasn't necessarily kind of giving back in a way that felt mutual. And eventually we set up a contract where I lease the land from you, and in order to kind of have the right to farm and run the farm as my business, and having that kind of contractual relationship has actually brought us closer and made
just
things
clarified, like, okay, the farm is yours, you're going to make a living, and that's your job. And then I board my horses and sheep at her farm now, you know. So we actually sort of, she gives me a check, I give her a check, and it's about equal, you know. But it's still, we have different interests, different strengths. I've been building my teaching and writing and practice all these years, so I have all these resources, where she's just getting going. And so there's a way we've figured it out so far, that I can support the farm in all various ways, and then she can help support back again. And that's been working for like 5 years. I think it's been really very harmonious that way. Yeah, I think we're going to make some changes in the next year or so, but as things evolve, but still the same principles of mutuality and, how do I take my resources to support her, but not in a way that wastes my resources, in a way that kind of gives back to me, and how does she give to the farm in a way that supports her and supports the longevity of the farm. So I think that's part of the yin-yang principles too, that we apply in the farm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have
It's
another?
kind of like sequestering carbon, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're holding it so that it's nourishing and not being given out and wasted and causing, like, clear cutting those forests.
Or pulling that oil or uranium out of the earth, like, that's what we do is, to make money, and, the way of our world is yin-yang, out of right relationship. And so I think these basic principles are super important. Yeah. So I'm curious if anybody has questions or things that come up for you about your own farms or your own farm dreams or anything in terms of Chinese medicine, yin-yang. Yeah.
Have you started to grow any herbs or?
She's the farmer, so.
Yeah, I am experimenting with some, just gochizu, because it grows really easily. It hasn't produced a lot of berries yet, but yes, not really is the answer.
You've
Yeah.
been growing some Western herbs, but not Chinese herbs. so
Oh
that-
yeah, definitely Western
Yeah.
herbs. Yeah.
We just met Thomas, who's starting a Chinese herbal farm out in Huntington, which is great. So we're hoping for some collaboration. Yeah,
Oh, I'm sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, because this is a relatively new farm, I'm curious about what was the biggest challenge, especially for Zoe, because she's like comes from a non-farming background and becomes a farmer. What was your biggest challenge, say, over the first 2 years?
For me personally, it's been the biggest challenge for me on the farm has been how to ask for help. I think the first season I was very much like, I need to do this by myself, and I think maybe that's just my personal tendency, is to want to be independent and be able to handle things on my own. But on a farm, we need our neighbors to like tell us that the goat's stuck in the fence because they're walking by, or the goat's giving birth. Like, we just have started to rely more and more on our community and inviting other people to help work on the farm as well. That was a hard thing for me. Yeah.
If I could tag on one more question to that.
Sure.
Other than the relationship with your mom, what would you say the greatest benefit that you've received?
Wow. I feel like, speaking about like the connection of the health of the human body to the farm, I feel like I've had the privilege of having such an intimate connection with a piece of land that it's kind of like gotten into my body in a certain way, and I feel like there's a sense when I'm moving around the farm that I have stopped kind of making a lot of lists of all the things that I need to do, and it's becoming more and more like I can just enter a space and see what needs to be done, because of a lot of years of doing it. Just becoming more and more familiar with a piece of land is like the greatest privilege, and it gets in your body, really gets in your body. Yeah.
It's very similar to indigenous wisdom, where you're asking the plants or the soil or whatever what it is they need, and it becomes part of this whole relationship where you don't even have to ask, and you also know how to give. So it's this reciprocity that happens. You know,
Yeah, I mean, it
care.
just makes me think about, like, you know, indigenous folks and how long they had that chance to develop those like body connections to those places, and how hard separation from that place must have been, and yeah, it's a really beautiful thing, even in the 7 years, the relatively short time that we've been there. Yeah. What do you? Yeah.
You might have already talked about this, so sorry, I'm just coming in late, but I'd love to learn details about the CSA, like how many people, what, like what you tend to supply, and I think a lot of CSA farmers have had the experience of like, look, this is what I would really like to give you, but then like, here's what you want, so all right, I'll do that. And I wonder if you've had that experience, or if you've just decided like, this is what the land has, so I guess I'm curious how that's gone.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So it's kind of a mix of, the model allows for the farmer to choose what they're getting every week, but I've also definitely gotten feedback about what people tend to really enjoy. But I feel like our CSA is really unique. It's small. We only have 30 families. But I don't know other CSAs who offer like wild foraged mushrooms and tea and goat cheese is a thing. Like, we don't, we gift the goat cheese in the CSA because we cannot legally sell the goat cheese. But this model allows us to share the goat cheese, which is delicious, yeah. Yes.
I have a question about the specifics of the mushroom foraging in the CSA, and I know different states have different regulations, and is that something that it follows that same gift-giving process? Is that how you're able to
Yes.
facilitate that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, and they say that there's old mushroom foragers and bold mushroom foragers, and there's no old bold. So I'm not bold at all. I'm extremely careful. Foraging mushrooms that have no poisonous look-alike.
Certainly.
So it feels very safe, and the community is our neighbors, so we know them. And they go out with us, on the foraging, and.
So I think part of the gift that you have is also the ability to educate your CSA and the people that come to your farm. I know in the farm that we were down, when we first would put out things like kohlrabi, and you'd be like, what the hell is a kohlrabi?
Mm.
And this is here's the recipe to use kohlrabi, and it's a gift to give to the people that, come to you, which is saying, I'm also not even gifting you food, but also knowledge and a new talent or whatever. And I think that's one of the pleasures of being a farmer is to share.
Yeah, and I can kind of push people to push their growing edge when it comes to what they know how to cook by like, now you need to okra, you know, what are you gonna do? Like, ask me for a recipe, but they are already receiving it, so they already have to figure it out. Yeah, and it keeps it really interesting for me as well, because, you know, I get into like vinegars one year, and I can give that in the CSA, you know, I can have an outlet that feeds the business for my various interests and experiments. It's a great model that way. Yeah.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you coming to our talk, and anybody's welcome to come and visit our farm anytime, especially during goat birthing season in April, May. The goats, we need a lot of people to cuddle them, because it turns them into very friendly goats later on.
I'll
they're-
come.
Please do,
Yeah.
please do.
And there's also goat cheese here for you to sample if you would like to try it. Just
What
basic
kind is
chev. Mm-hmm. Yes.